What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates. You can find and follow me on Twitter at KyleYNFL. I'm joined today by Marvin Elequin. He's a part of the writing team over at the Fantasy Footballers. His rankings can also be found at Dynasty Nerds, and he can be found on Twitter at FF_Marvin E. Marvin, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come join me here on the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. A big fan of what you guys do over here, so I'm excited to talk some football with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of fun. We were talking about this before we started recording. For those who don't know my background, I was a part of the writing team at the Fantasy Footballers a year ago, and I was writing a little article called the Dynasty Report, and Marvin took over that when I left and joined the team here at Fantasy Pro. So there's a fun little connection here. I'm excited to pick his brain as we go through some Dynasty wide receivers, and we'll recap the Monday Night Football game, catastrophe that happened last week, whatever we want to call it. We've got some news, and we've got a listener mailbag. It should be a good show. Before we get into all that, though, if you have loved our content this season, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Fantasy Pros. We've got quick-hitting, fun, and helpful posts on our Instagram channel every single day. Also on Twitter, we share all the latest news and we post our most insightful content. Make sure to get an edge in your league by following us on Twitter and Instagram at Fantasy Pros. Let's go win some championships. All right, Marvin, let's talk through this Monday Night Football game here that happened. Cincinnati 27, Pittsburgh 17. If we had gone into this week and you had told me that the Jets and the Bengals were going to win their matchups, I would have called you absolutely crazy, but here we are. And I don't know about you. I've been playing fantasy football for several years. I cannot remember a more pivotal game that decided a lot of fantasy football championships, right? Like teams that got into the championship, so many matchups were decided on the back of this game last night. Eric Ebron and JuJu Smith-Schuster. I mean, all these... There were so many teams that needed these players to come through, and they did not. Let's talk about the Steelers here. Ben Roethlisberger, 20 for 38, 170 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I don't know about you, but watching that game, I think that his arm is just done. I think that looking at the Steelers throwing the ball, being as pass happy as they were throughout the first part of this season, probably fine. But then as we get throughout the rest of this season, to rely on Ben's 38, 39 years old now, coming off of a season where he didn't play due to an arm issue, and I think his arm is just done at this point of the season. He says that he's planning on returning next year. Do we actually think that he can hold up this kind of pace, Marvin?
And I'm not sure if we can expect to see the fantasy dominant Big Ben again next year. We kind of saw it earlier this year a little bit, but like you said, he just doesn't look good throwing the ball deep anymore. He's got the tools and the weapons to do it. It's just, with Chase Claypool, you have JuJu Smith-Schuster, you have Deontay Johnson. I mean, ideally that should yield to fantasy production, but we're just not seeing it over these last couple of games. So, as like you said, a lot of fantasy managers were relying on these players, and it just didn't work out. And it'll be interesting to see how they perform heading into the playoffs and in the playoffs, but it's just not looking good for the Steelers right now.
Yeah, for sure. 3-game losing streak here heading into the playoffs. We thought this was a team that maybe could push for 16-0. Yeah, not looking good here recently. Let's talk about the receivers, though. You did mention Deontay Johnson. He comes through. This was a risky play heading into Week 15, right? We said that if he drops one more pass, there's a possibility that he rides the bench. He comes through, though. 13 targets, 8 receptions, 59 yards, and the score on a nice pass from Ben in the back of the end zone. And then Chase Claypool gets it done for fantasy football, not in the way that we would really hope to see, but 8 targets, 3 receptions, 54 yards, no score. This is where it gets ugly. JuJu Smith-Schuster, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 15 yards. He's now, going into this game, I think he was averaging 8.2 yards per reception on the season. This certainly doesn't help. So JuJu Smith-Schuster, in the next week, Marvin, are you just sitting JuJu? At this point, do you just sit JuJu if you did manage to squeak through to your fantasy football championship?
Yeah, it's against the Colts, so it's a tough defense. It all depends on what you have there. I think if he's taken you this far, you might not have a choice but to play him. But I do agree. I'm a little hesitant to play any of those receivers at this point. Deontay Johnson's had the volume, but even then, like you said, just one drop, and he could be benched for James Washington, and might just be out of the rotation entirely. So, for Juju specifically, I think I'd hesitate to play him, but I'm afraid I think in most cases you might have to, because he's still a solid flex. He still has some of that upside, but it's just the floor is so low with him now.
Yeah, completely. James Washington was someone that we were kind of considering. He'd seen his involvement in the offense increase over the past couple weeks. 3 targets, 0, 0, 0. Nothing there. Eric Ebron, 1 target, and that was the throw into triple coverage that got him banged up. He ends up leaving this game. So for fantasy managers who needed just like 2 points out of Eric Ebron, you didn't get it. I think that he's going to be out for this next game. Even next week up against Indianapolis, it is a tough defense. He's probably not someone that I would be looking to play regardless. The running game, though, Benny Snell was someone that we were saying it's risky, to play him after what we've seen here recently, but he takes advantage of the matchup here. 18 for 84 and a score. Let's look ahead to next week. Let's just assume that James Conner is out. He's been banged up all season long. Let's just assume that he's out, Marvin. If up against Indianapolis, are you playing Benny Snell within your top 24 running backs?
I would not put him there. Not against the Colts defense and that run defense. It's a tall task to go against the Colts, and honestly, if you had to play him, I think he's maybe a low end flex just because of volume alone. You expect them to run the ball as much as possible, but if they fall behind, it'll be interesting to see how they manage that. And there's still Anthony McFarland. It's not just one guy, and I know they've done that in the past, but we've seen it work out with Benny Snell on some weeks, and then one week he might just not perform at all. And I think that's one of those things where you have to weigh the ceiling and the floor, and that's why to me he's more of a low end flex with a floor that he might give you in championship week. That's a lot to ask for.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think up against the Colts, if it was a better matchup, I think that would be one thing where I'd be saying, yeah, we can definitely look at 18 carries. That's solid. That's solid volume. I think we can totally lean back on that. But yet up against the Colts, that is a fantastic run defense. I'll probably be fading him heading into next week. Let's look at the Bengals side of this. I started laughing earlier today when I looked at the stat line here. I don't know why, but I didn't notice this. Ryan Finley only threw the ball 13 times last night. 89 yards, a score. He went 7 for 13. It does get 10 carries for 47 yards on the ground and a score. Ryan Finley's not someone that you're looking at going into next week, though. Please do not play him. But the guy who, this was, if we faded someone all year, it was Gio Bernard in this matchup. 25 carries, 83 yards, and a score. Does reel in his 1 target for 14 yards and another touchdown. Up against Pittsburgh, this was just bizarre. This game was just completely wacky from get-go. So to Gio Bernard next week, I don't know about you. I'm not going to be playing him. I think this is a fluke game. What do you think here with Gio heading into next week?
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think that's kind of the trend we've seen with him, where he's just hasn't, he's gotten the volume in most cases in most games, but it just hasn't really performed. And this is one of the few this year when Mixon was out that he actually performed and gave us a fantasy relevant game. So even against the Texans, I hesitate to play him. It's just, I would assume that you probably picked up Gio off waivers and you probably have better options. So I'd lean going and pivoting somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, he's, like I said, he's a low upside play here, and I definitely think that this was more of a fluke than it is more of a sign of things to come.
Yeah, for sure. That Houston matchup is definitely tempting, but I think he's going to be kind of in that same range of a Benny Snell. Probably as a high-end RB3 for me, someone that you can plug in if you're in a pinch, but someone I think you do have better options. The receiving game, I said going into this one, sit every Bengals receiver, sit everyone in this game. I expected this to be a blowout on Pittsburgh's side, and Ryan Finley has just not shown me enough to see that he can, succeed in those kind of matchups. But AJ Green, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 40 yards. T. Higgins, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 31 yards. Tyler Boyd does see that target, but then gets knocked out. Does end up leaving that game with a concussion. So I guess heading into next week, my question up against Houston, it's a fine matchup. Are you going to be playing any of these Bengals receivers? And if so, which one?
If I had to choose one, Tyler Boyd, I'd play him if he was he was active and healthy. If he isn't, though, in a desperation play, I'd play Higgins, but otherwise, I wouldn't feel confident about that. I wouldn't feel confident playing any of the other receivers. It's just not, like you said, Ryan Finley, I'm not too convinced in his ability to lead this offense. I know he had a decent game, but it was more on the ground, really. So, next week, if you had to play someone, I'd play Higgins, maybe Boyd, but I'm not going to expect, I don't know, like 100-yard, a touchdown game from either of them.
Yep, I'm in complete agreement. All right, let's take a look at some news items here. Cam Akers has a high ankle sprain. He is out for Week 16. I think it's all but official at this point, and he might be out even longer. Kind of surprising that he did end up coming back in this game against the Jets. But Cam Akers, high ankle sprain. Let's look at and analyze the remaining options here. Darrell Henderson had been kind of left for dead. He's kind of my top waiver wire option if he is available in your league. Now, he's over our threshold. That's why we didn't talk about him on our waiver wire podcast yesterday. But, at 63%, I think, is what his rostership is. So he's available in plenty of leagues. If he's out there, I think he's worth picking up, and I think he's worth playing as potentially a top 24 running back next week up against Seattle. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Darrell Henderson is the guy that I'd pick up and probably would start in that situation. I think he has solid floor with the volume that he'll probably receive. I know it'll be interesting to see if they transition back into that RBBC with Malcolm Brown as the second guy, because Cam Akers was really the man for that backfield. I mean, he was accounting for 39% of the team opportunity share, which is insanely high for a running back, and was producing on it too. So if Darrell Henderson slots in and gets that, I think he'll be a really, really good play. But I still hesitate. I do think they might go back to, I think that was more of a product of who Cam Akers was than it is them transitioning into one back system only. I think they might go back to splitting maybe a 70-30 split with Henderson and Malcolm Brown. Still, Darrell Henderson should be a solid play in my opinion, so I agree.
Yeah, I definitely think he's worth playing. You bring up a great point that, if he does end up splitting some work here with Malcolm Brown, especially surrendering the receiving work, then that might limit his ceiling. But yeah, I do think that he's still going to bring a safe floor. I think that he's someone that you can pick up and play in championship week if you need to. Deshaun Jackson, designated to return from IR. My only question is why? We'll move on. Ito Smith is the Falcons' lead running back right now, according to head coach Raheem Morris. Let's just talk about Todd Gurley, man. From a dynasty perspective, what are we doing with Todd Gurley?
Yeah, I wrote about him actually last week in my weekly article for the Fantasy Footballers, and had him as one of the guys whose stock is trending down. It's just not looking good for him, especially in this RBBC. Now the comments from the coaching staff as well. It's just not. There's no confidence in playing him. I can't imagine anyone's going to play him at this point. But for Dynasty, he's on a 1-year contract, if I remember correctly, so he'll be a free agent again. With all these. With these other free agents as well, entering free agents, Aaron Jones, Chris Carson, all those guys, plus this great running back class coming in as well, or at least the top end that's really, really solid. I'm not sure there's a place where Gurley's going to receive the volume, and that's really the reason he's been so fantasy relevant is because of volume alone, not efficiency as much anymore, like we used to see it back with the Rams. So if there's no opportunity for him to receive 20 plus touches, I'm not sure he's going to be very fantasy relevant going forward. So unfortunately, he's a fade for me in Dynasty. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that we could be at the point where, his knee's shot. I think his knee's done.
Yeah.
And so we could be at the point even potentially this offseason where we see Todd Gurley hang it up. Because, again, you talk about the opportunity. He's not going to get an opportunity. If he can't do it here against Ito Smith and Brian Hill in his backfield to carve out that significant role, then his knee's done. And that is just such a significant fall from grace of where 2 years ago, right, we were talking about Todd Gurley's a top 3 dynasty running back. He had just secured that big payday from the Rams. And now, as far as the Falcons, Ito Smith, he's still not someone that I'm looking at. I think that this backfield, Ito Smith has done nothing for me to feel confident plugging him into my lineup next week in championship week. And then even into next year, I fully expect the Falcons to bring in some running back, right? Whether that is a Devontae Williams in the draft, whether that is potentially even Aaron Jones in free agency, right? Like I do expect them to bring in someone. Stephon Diggs, the foot injury apparently is not overly worrisome, so we'll continue to monitor that as we head throughout the week. Okay, let's get into a listener mailbag. Again, you guys can submit questions over on Twitter at KyleYNFL. I put out these tweets occasionally throughout the week, and it's always great just to talk through these in real life situations rather than just speaking in a lot of generalities, but to be able to dive in and answer your guys' questions in depth. AJ Lawrence, would you trade Miles Sanders and Bryan Edwards for Tariq Cohen and picks 101 and 112 in a dynasty? So let's just answer that part first, and then he's got a second part of his question. So would you trade Miles Sanders and Bryan Edwards for Tariq Cohen and picks 101 and 112? I'll just turn this over to you, and then I'll chime in here with my thoughts. But Miles Sanders, Bryan Edwards for Tariq Cohen and picks 101 and 112 in a dynasty.
You know, I actually, even if without Tariq Cohen, I think I would do this trade. I believe whoever that 101 is, whether that be Travis Etienne or Najee Harris, I think he'll be in that running back, wherever that is, will be in a great situation. He'll be the 101 for a reason and will potentially be the workhorse. And I think I prefer that over Miles Sanders. And then really the big difference here is that 112 in this deep wide receiver class. I think that could actually be a better receiver than Bryan Edwards. And, Bryan Edwards hasn't produced as much as we would have liked, considering all the other rookies have broken out already. But I do like this wide receiver class. I think it's very deep, and you could get a really good receiver at 112. And then you add in Tariq Cohen, who I think still has some pass-catching upside in a PPR league. So to me, I lean going with the picks. I don't know if that's the rookie hype that's getting to me this early already, but I just like this draft class a lot. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think with Miles Sanders, you obviously have the concerns hanging over his head. And really, it's hard to say this after last week where he saw, I think, every single running back carry in this backfield. So it's hard to say that this definitively. But with Doug Peterson, there's always been this hanging over his head of he wants to utilize not necessarily a full RBBC, but yet, he wants to get other backs involved, which limits the overall upside here of Miles Sanders in this offense. Now, with Jalen Hurts moving forward, I think that this offense can be better. I think it can open up running lanes for Miles Sanders. So I'm very hesitant to give away a proven asset for, some rookie picks that do come with some volatility. However, one of the things that I'm really kind of contemplating and weighing right now heading into this offseason and kind of just, wrestling with this is what's more important right now in Dynasty? Is it the proven veteran assets, or is it the, that have more talent? Because I think from a talent perspective, Miles Sanders is an immensely talented running back, super athletic, can absolutely succeed and be a top-tier fantasy asset if he does get the type of workload that you see Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry and these other backs get. The thing is, do I want to buy into that and the talent, but they come with these messy situations, or do I want to buy into a less talented player, but who has a clear opportunity? And with these running backs coming in and looking at some of the opportunities that are available this offseason, we talked about previously Pittsburgh, Houston, some of these other situations where if Najee Harris lands in Pittsburgh, it's going to be my 101, man.
Exactly.
I don't, that is just such a phenomenal situation for him, who I think Najee Harris is a talented back in his own right, but he doesn't hold a candle to Miles Sanders from an athletic perspective. So I think it's just a really interesting situation that I'm trying to weigh. When you do factor in that Bryan Edwards has really done nothing up to this point of his career, I love the talent, but yet this offense doesn't flow through the wide receivers. It's concerning moving forward. And then Tariq Cohen, Tariq Cohen's value is an all-time low. We can't forget how talented of a receiver that he is and how involved he is in this offense when he's fully healthy. So if you can get Tariq Cohen, the 101 who could turn into a Najee Harris in, Pittsburgh, or Travis Etienne in Atlanta, or a dynamic offense here, and the 112, and you mentioned it, a very, very deep wide receiver class, I think I might take that other side. Now, it's a gamble. Anytime you're sending away a proven veteran asset for a rookie, it's a gamble. But I do think in this situation, it's worth it. His second part of his question, and would you consider Trevor Lawrence with pick 101 in a single quarterback league if you have Derek Carr, Mitchell Trubisky, and Drew Lock as your current quarterbacks? What do you think there?
I understand where he's coming from, but I hesitate just because it's a single quarterback league. I think you want the stud running backs in that case, or even just the clear-cut wide receiver one if you want to go that direction. If I would pass on Trevor Lawrence at the 101 just because I think there's more valuable talent for that league format that you can pivot to. But with the 112, if Trevor Lawrence is there, I would absolutely do that. I think he's, I try to wait until the second round to draft quarterbacks, but Trevor Lawrence is a special talent who I think could be a stud quarterback, a top QB1 potentially for a long time. So I think with the 112, I would do it. With the 101, I would hesitate and wait.
Yep, I completely agree there. 101's too rich for me in a 1 QB league, but at the 112, for if someone like Trevor Lawrence is still there, I think you can absolutely consider him there. The other thing that I would keep in mind is that this is a very deep quarterback class where you have really interesting guys. So Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, of course, then Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. Like, there are some very deep options here. So spending up to get Trevor Lawrence at the 101 isn't going to be worth it when you consider the second tier or third tier options that you could get much, much later, especially in a 1 quarterback league. Ed Murray Media, which keeper, if either, would you prefer? T. Higgins or Jerry Jeudy? And he says both would be $1 keepers. So it's the same price tag here for each of these guys. So I guess it just depends on who do we see having the better season next year. For me, it's a pretty clear answer. It's T. Higgins. With Joe Burrow coming back, you're expecting the Bengals to invest in the offensive line throughout the offseason. A.J. Green will not be back, almost certainly, will not be back here in Cincinnati. So it's going to be T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. They might add someone through the draft or free agency, but T. Higgins looks like a star in the making. Jerry Jeudy, you're looking at a quarterback situation here where if I have to make this decision right now, I'm not betting on Drew Lock. I love Jerry Jeudy, the talent. I think he's more talented than T. Higgins, but the quarterback situation here makes this a pretty clear answer, for me at least. Where do you land with T. Higgins or Jerry Jeudy?
I completely agree. I think it's T. Higgins, easily T. Higgins, considering what he's done this year with Joe Burrow, who's supposed to be back healthy, hopefully, and considering what he was able to do when Joe Burrow was the quarterback. I mean, at one point he was, a top 15 wide receiver for fantasy. And I think his upside's even higher than that. So, and your other point with Drew Lock, I'm just not a fan of Drew Lock and his upside and his ability to lead that offense. So as much as I love Jerry Jeudy, I think he's a great, great wide receiver. It's just until they upgrade at quarterback, I lean the proven wide receiver in T. Higgins as well, and with the better situation.
Yeah, completely. And we could see Denver go into this offseason and upgrade somehow at quarterback, right? We could see them bring in a free agent quarterback or draft someone early in the draft, whatever, which could upgrade the situation for Jerry Jeudy. But if I have to make this decision right now, I'm betting on the more proven commodity, which is T. Higgins. Jay asks, I'm thinking about starting up a dynasty league where the rookie draft is shortly before the NFL draft. Thoughts on if you have ever heard of a league run this way and the pros and cons of it. I'm going to chime in here really quick and then I'll get your thoughts, Marvin. I have heard this, right? There are plenty of leagues that do this as far as running the rookie draft before the NFL draft. I have personally never been in one, but I am more of an advocate of doing it after the NFL draft where we know the landing spots of these guys and we can say, okay, with a little bit more certainty, this is what their fantasy outlook is going to be. If we are completely gambling on talent, I would have drafted someone like Keyshawn Vaughn in the middle of the first round. I was a big Keyshawn Vaughn fan coming out of college, out of Vanderbilt, and then he ends up in Tampa and splitting that workload with Ronald Jones, and you're like, okay, maybe, but it pushes him down the board, right? Where we have a little bit more clarity to be able to... rookie drafts in general are just a crapshoot, like completely, right? But where we have the ability to at least be able to analyze it a little bit more in depth, I'm definitely a fan of. Now, I don't like waiting super long after the NFL draft. Like, there are a couple leagues that I'm in dynasty leagues where we do the rookie draft back or like in August, right? Like where we do where typically rookie drafts are done in May, April, like right after the NFL draft. That's more where I would recommend if you are setting up your dynasty league. That's what I would recommend, is doing it almost immediately after the rookie draft or the NFL draft. That way you have at least like that hype is still there and you are still taking chances on players. Whereas if you wait until August, you might find out that this rookie got injured in mini camps or anything like that. So let me just turn it over to you. What do you think here with starting up a dynasty league where the rookie draft is shortly before the NFL draft?
Yeah, I definitely would prefer to have it after the NFL draft. Like you said, there's just more clarity. We know what we're getting ourselves into. We have just a better idea of what we can expect from these rookies. The one upside potentially with this, and I was it wasn't a separate rookie draft, but I was in a startup that included rookies before the NFL draft. So you were drafting these guys out of talent and potential, and the upside with that is you could potentially get a steal on some of these guys, because without the landing spot, they're not going high. You think about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who in this specific draft, I remember he went in like the 7th, 8th, maybe even later in that startup draft. Right now, he'd go in the top 2. I mean, considering where he is and the offense he's in, his landing spot just moved him up draft boards pretty quickly. And that's where you have that potential to get a steal, especially in a deeper class where we maybe we have some talented guys, down the board. You might be able to get someone who might land in a great spot, and you won't know until the NFL draft. So there's that. That's the pro. Obviously, the con is you might draft someone, like you said, like Vaughn was someone who I thought was great as well. And then that landing spot wasn't perfect and wasn't ideal. So there are pros and cons to it. I would prefer to just wait, but there's certainly more excitement and more, potentially more return on investment if you did it before the NFL draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to turn this next one right back around to you, David Wallace. How do you separate yourself, from your favorite team when you're drafting or targeting players on the waiver wire? So let's just talk about drafting specifically. So he says, I find myself starting 3 to 4 players from my team, from his favorite team, whether that's, Dallas Cowboys, whatever, and it's a problem. I'll just ask you that. How do you separate yourself from your favorite team?
It's tough. I think in everyone's head, you kind of elevate the players on your team just slightly, just because you're much closer to them. You think certain guys have more upside than others. But honestly, I intentionally try to separate it and just say, okay, if there's someone here who I believe is just as talented, I might not necessarily pick, I'm a Packers fan. Devontae Adams is an easy pickup, early, but in the later rounds, maybe Aaron Jones. If I can pick someone else, I might do it, just because if I'm watching the game and they're not playing well, it's kind of a win-win situation where, okay, we're not, winning necessarily, but I might be going against Aaron Jones, and he's not having a great game, something like that. But it's definitely tough. I think it's more enjoyable if you can root for them. But then again, if your team's losing, and that might also mean you're losing in fantasy, and that's just, that's not as fun.
Right. Yeah, I think fantasy football should be fun, right?
Exactly.
At its core, it should be fun, right? So I think if you have 1 or 2 players that on your team that you absolutely want to take and you want to draft, and because that'll make it more fun for you, then please do that. Don't sacrifice value when you're drafting. Don't take them 3 rounds above where you're supposed to, just for fear that someone else is going to take them. That's how you end up losing fantasy football. But I think with specifically adding 3 to 4 players, it is risky. It works out with a team like the Chiefs, where you have a very, very dynamic offense, but yet in these other offenses, there are very rarely 3 to 4 players that can come through for you. And if you are investing so heavily in an offense and it doesn't turn out to be the way that people projected it or that you thought it was going to be, you might have a lost fantasy football season because you invested so heavily in it. So again, invest and make it fun. Take the players that you think that you are going to make fantasy football more fun for you because they're part of your favorite team, but yet don't go too overboard. I think that is the way that I would answer that. PJ Geringer, what are some dynasty stashes for next year that you're high on? I'll throw out a couple of my guys and then I'll go to you here. But for me, I'm looking at the teams that are going to get improvement at the quarterback position. And so I think we talked about Jerry Jeudy. I think that he's someone that you absolutely can look at, because I don't think Denver's going to go into next year with just Drew Lock. I think they're going to bring in either a veteran to kind of push him, or they could just take completely scratch it and say, we're going to go back to the well, or we're going to in the draft, or we're going to bring in a veteran to be the starter. I think he's going to get a quarterback upgrade either way. And so Jerry Jeudy is someone that I would be looking at for sure. And then I'm looking at the teams that are going to get that quarterback upgrade in the draft, the 2 that we are projecting right now of the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville becomes a little bit more attractive based on what we saw this past weekend, with Jacksonville moving up to that number 1 overall pick. And most likely, right, there's still a lot that has to play out, but most likely securing Trevor Lawrence. So I think guys like DJ Chark, I think you can buy him super cheap right now. Looking at maybe even super deep, he's probably on your waiver wire in dynasty leagues. Colin Johnson, these kind of guys that are going to get the quarterback upgrade are the ones that I want to invest in. What about you? What are some dynasty stashes for next year that you're high on?
Yeah, one of the guys we already mentioned him. We talked about him is Bryan Edwards, who didn't really produce this year, and that there's that just disappointment with pretty much all the other rookie wide receivers, the top ones, breaking out or having great games. Bryan Edwards just struggled with injuries. It's a weird off season, and hopefully if things normalize again and he can get back and have a regular off season in camp with Derek Carr and the rest of the offense. I definitely think there's still upside with him. He's still he's young, and he profiled as the X receiver for that offense. So to me, I think he still has that upside. Hold on to him. Don't trade him away for pennies on the dollar, in my opinion. Another guy that I like and is more of a deeper stash is Tyler Johnson, Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver, who could have an opportunity. I'm thinking Tom Brady's still going to be there. We never know. He's ageless. He continues to play. But with Godwin potentially hitting free agency, I'm not sure what's going to happen, if they're going to franchise tag him, if they end up letting him go with other free agents being more of a priority for him. Tyler Johnson could profile as that slot receiver, the guy that switches inside, outside. He can do both, and we saw some flashes earlier this year. So someone has a deep stash. I definitely think Tyler Johnson could be an interesting just taxi squad stash that could pay out in about a year.
Yeah, it definitely all depends on Chris Godwin and what happens with him, but I like the call. Nicholas Edward asked kind of a question building off of that. With the Jags looking at 101, what are the outlooks on Shenault, Chark, and Robinson in both Dynasty and 21 redraft, as opposed to with the 102 and most likely Justin Fields? I mentioned, and I'll just gloss over this one, Marvin, like they're going to get that quarterback upgrade, right? They're going to get an upgrade from Mike Glennon, Jake Luton, and Gardner Minshew, right? Either way. So I think, looking at Shenault, it can only go up. And Shenault, Chark, and Robinson. Robinson's an interesting one because I really don't know if Jacksonville's going to look at the amount of cap space that they have. It's ridiculous. And then also their draft capital, which is also ridiculous, and say, okay, we're going to bring in some competition here at the running back position. James Robinson started to wear down with all the work that we gave him this season. Okay, let's see if we can bring in someone to provide a little bit of a change of pace, or maybe even supercharge the position. If let's talk about the possibility of if Travis Etienne or Najee Harris falls in the draft, right? They're just continuing to fall. Jacksonville's on the clock in the second round, and they just say, okay, we'll take Najee Harris. At that point, James Robinson becomes irrelevant. So I think that's something to continue to monitor. I don't really want to plant my flag on James Robinson just yet. But if they go into this offseason and they don't add anyone, then we know that James Robinson is the guy, and he would probably be drafted as a top 5 running back next year. Let's move on here to our wide receiver dynasty rankings. I talked with Matt Hicks, last week, and we went through our top 15 running back rankings. So if you missed that episode, make sure to go back and listen. We're going to continue talking through our dynasty rankings again, and like I said, take a look at the wide receiver position. We're going to do a countdown style from 15 to 1, just like last week, and spend some time talking about these players and their long-term outlooks. Marvin, since you're our guest, I will turn it over to you. Who is at number 15 in your dynasty wide receiver rankings?
So number 15 for me is Stephon Diggs, someone who I didn't have as high as this earlier this year, just because we weren't sure with Josh Allen, would there be enough volume? Could he sustain a top end wide receiver one? And he can, he really can, and that's what Diggs is showing right now. He's a top receiver in fantasy, wide receiver 3 in weighted opportunity rating, wide receiver 2 in receiving yards, wide receiver 4 in air yards. I mean, he's just balling out this season, and he always has been one of the better receivers. Matt Harmon's reception perception has him graded highly every single year because he's just that good of a route runner. And I think he just needed that opportunity. He's getting the volume. He's now the lead receiver, not behind Adam Thielen. So I like him a lot going forward. I'd probably have him higher in my rankings if there weren't other receivers that I like more.
Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioned it. The difference here with Stephon Diggs, I mean, maybe pushing for fantasy football MVP this season with the way where we drafted him, right? Like people were getting him in the 5th or 6th round because in like the 20s of the wide receivers off the board, because we thought this offense was going to look completely different than what it is now and what it has turned out to be with just letting Josh Allen loose. So Yeah, I've got Stephon Diggs at 13, man. I completely agree with you here that this is he's still only 27 years old. We've got several years left here of Stephon Diggs, producing at a top tier level, and he's tied to Josh Allen for the foreseeable future. So, yeah, I think that it's very different than what I expected going into the year, but Stephon Diggs absolutely deserves to be in the top 15 of Dynasty rankings. At number 15 for me is CeeDee Lamb. I don't want to forget about CeeDee Lamb and what he was doing with Dak Prescott on the field. Now, I think his value right now is at an all-time low. I don't think that the industry or the Dynasty community as a whole is valuing CeeDee Lamb all the way up here at 15. But yet, based on what he did when Dak Prescott was at quarterback, I think that we need to be talking about him as a guy who has an immensely high ceiling moving into next year. Dak Prescott going to come back full strength. I think that he either gets franchise tagged here again in Dallas or is going to be back on a long-term deal. I think that he is going to be the quarterback here in Dallas next year. And if that's the case, then I want the receivers that are tied to a quarterback like Dak. So CeeDee Lamb here at 15. Where does he land in your Dynasty rankings?
So I have him pretty high as well. Actually higher than you and probably higher than most. I have him at 9. I just
Perfect.
really like what we've seen from him. I mean, he was a great fantasy receiver. I know still playing behind Amari Cooper, but when Dak was there, he was wide receiver 16 in PPR leagues in points per game. Had a target share of 70%. 70% might not sound much, but if you're throwing the ball 50 plus times, that's
Right.
a lot of targets right there. So I like the outlook for him. I'm assuming Dak's going to be there long term, and they're going to re-sign him. He's going to be back healthy. So, I just echo all your points. I think he's a great receiver, super talented. My wide receiver 1 in this rookie class. So I love CeeDee Lamb going forward, and definitely think he's got a bright future ahead of him.
Absolutely. Let's go to your number 14 wide receiver.
So it's another Dallas Cowboys wide receiver. It's Amari Cooper. I still think he's one of the more underrated receivers. And one of the knocks on him was that he just wasn't that consistent, week to week. But when Dak was healthy, he actually was very consistent. Even after that, with the quarterback change, he was producing some solid fantasy weeks. So I like CeeDee Lamb a little more than Amari Cooper just because of Dynasty. I'm looking at the youth, the contract situation. Amari Cooper, I think, has a pretty front-loaded contract, and they might have an out later in his contract. So could be CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver 1, but until then, Amari Cooper's still there. He's producing, and I think they can definitely coexist together as the 1A, 1B in a high-powered offense. Where do you have him?
Yeah, I completely agree. I've got him at 12. So Amari Cooper, 26 years old, man. He's been in the league for a long time already. And so we kind of have this perception, yeah, he's like 29, 30 years old. No, he's 26. And so he's still going to be in Dallas for the foreseeable future. Again, I talked about this offense with Dak. I echo a lot of your points there. I think that Amari Cooper absolutely still deserves to be in this top 15 conversation and even higher. For me, number 14 is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen a little bit older here, but yet still not super old, to the point where I expect a drop-off anytime soon. And based on what we have seen here from Justin Herbert and this offense, Justin Herbert, man, I missed on Justin Herbert coming out. This guy is just a superstar in the making. And so I think that Keenan Allen, the amount of targets that he sees in this offense from Justin Herbert, I don't think that that's going to change no matter if they upgrade at wide receiver, if they bring in several new options. Keenan Allen is going to be the guy in this offense. He's going to continue to just get open routinely. So Keenan Allen at 14, he gets a little bit of a downgrade just because he is a little bit older than some of the other guys that are up above in my rankings. But yet at the same time, I still think that we need to be talking about Keenan Allen as one of the top tier Dynasty wide receivers.
Absolutely. I have him a little lower. I have him at wide receiver 20. But I think that the reason he's down there is because there are so many great wide receivers that we can slot into the top 15 at this point. And to be honest, what separates, let's say wide receiver 13 and 14 into wide receiver 20 is not much to me. Like you said,
Right.
Justin Herbert is a stud. Love what we've seen from him so far, and Keenan Allen continues to be the target monster that he's been over the last several years, and he's been relatively healthy as well. He's been on the field, and I think he can be a wide receiver 1 for a couple more years. Low end wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 with upside, but the like you said, it's the age. He's getting older, so that's partially why he's a little further down my rankings, but still a great receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to number 13 for you.
So number 13 is T. Higgins. We talked about him already. Tied to Joe Burrow long term. The clear-cut wide receiver 1, wide receiver 13 with Burrow there. So he was borderline wide receiver 1 in his rookie year, and I think the upside is tremendous. He can still get better. And at one point, he was leading this rookie class in dominator rating, leading them in first downs. Like, he was just the guy that AJ Green was in the past, that was relied on to go to when things were rough, when the play broke down. Joe Burrow would go to T. Higgins, and I think that's super valuable in fantasy. Someone who we see is utilized pretty heavily in the offense. And like you said, even if they added someone in the offseason, I think they, this offense as a whole, I expect it to improve. If they upgrade their offensive line specifically. So I like T. Higgins going forward. I think he's got quite a few high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 seasons, if not better seasons ahead.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one because I was looking at my rankings earlier and I was like, man, I've got T. Higgins at 20 right now, but I want to push him higher. Yep. I really do, because I'm a big believer in his long-term outlook. Now, again, you talked about the difference here between, we just finished talking about Keenan Allen at 14 for me and at 20 for you. Like, the difference here is not that drastic, right? So I think with T. Higgins, I absolutely am very, very excited for him moving forward. He's not in the territory where, like, I wouldn't move him for one of these more proven commodities. I still think that if you can get like an Amari Cooper, some of these other guys that we're going to talk about here in a minute, I would still consider doing that. But yet, T. Higgins, very, very bright future. Completely agree. My number 13 was Stephon Diggs. We talked about him. So let's go to your number 12. We haven't talked about them yet, have we?
We have not. So I'm not sure where you have him. I know he's someone who a lot of people are just kind of just been disappointed in this year, and it's DJ Moore, Panthers wide receiver, who understandably, has taken a drop in most dynasty rankings. I had him higher earlier this year, and we just, with the addition of Robbie Anderson, we just haven't seen that possession, high target, high reception receiver that we saw last year in DJ Moore. And it just started out a little shaky. I think, to start the year, we could see his, average depth of target was a career high for him. He was more of a deep threat than he was a possession receiver, and the role kind of changed. And now, ever since coming back over the last 5 weeks, I think he was out for maybe a week with COVID, I believe. And over the last 4 games, he's wide receiver 12 in PPR points per game, and we've seen Robbie Anderson kind of trail back a little bit. So I still like him a lot. Part of the reason why I have him still here is because I wonder, with what we've seen from Teddy Bridgewater is fine. It's solid, but I think they could, with all the weapons that they have, this offense could be explosive. And to me, I think they need a better quarterback. And the Panthers are 5th right now in the pecking order for the draft. I'm wondering if they could trade up and grab a quarterback potentially. And if they do, I think that's when you see DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, all those guys just get a bump up. And I'm, and even then, I still think DJ Moore's a talented receiver. So that's why I have him at 12.
Yeah, I've got him at 17. So, again, in this same territory, I do think that, again, we're talking about a very, very young wide receiver. So he's still kind of learning his role in the NFL. We did see Robbie Anderson step in and take more of a role than, I liked Robbie Anderson in draft season. He took on even more of a role than I anticipated. So I think that that's kind of hurt the perception here with DJ Moore. But yeah, I do think that he is someone that we should still be excited about long term. And again, you talked about it. The Panthers are sitting 4th or 5th, like you mentioned, in the draft order currently, and they could still continue to climb. And I think that as they lose more games with 2 left, I think that we could see them absolutely look at this quarterback class, say we're still a very young team. We like Teddy Bridgewater. We like what he's done for us. But if we can upgrade that position, we don't want to be, as a franchise, we don't want to be sitting here within the top 5 every single year. And we have a really good quarterback class incoming. If we say, like, we want to take advantage of our opportunity to be here in the top 5 and upgrade at the quarterback position, then you do that. And I think that they could absolutely bring in someone like a Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. And at that point, then I think that you do see a little bit of a bump up here for DJ Moore. He could absolutely climb if we do see that quarterback change. We talked about my guy at number 12, which is Amari Cooper. So I'm going to go with 11. We're going to switch the order here just a little bit because you've been talking a ton. So I will go with number 11 here. For me, it's Terry McLaurin. Now, you look at McLaurin and looking at the situation here in Washington, the quarterback situation is pretty gross no matter which way you look at it, whether it is Alex Smith at this point of his career. Now, Smith has been good, but he hasn't been the guy who's just doing amazing things for this offense and just funneling targets Terry McLaurin's way. Dwayne Haskins, we know that he's not the guy long-term. So I think for Terry McLaurin to do what he's done up to this point of his career with the quarterback situation that he's played with proves to me that he is an immense talent and that he is worth ranking here in the top 12 long-term, because now what happens? What happens if they do hit the upgrade button at the quarterback position over Alex Smith and Dwayne Haskins, which I think is pretty easy to do. And now Terry McLaurin absolutely has an improved situation around him where he could just continue to ascend. And so I think that looking at Terry McLaurin into next year, if they do upgrade the quarterback position, I wouldn't be shocked if we're doing an episode here next year at this time and we're talking about Terry McLaurin as the top 5 dynasty wide receiver. Where do you have Terry McLaurin? I
have him at wide receiver 11 as well. I love what we've seen from him. I think he's just proven that he, to some extent, is quarterback proof. He's just a solid, talented receiver. And like you said, if they, to keep it short, if they upgrade a quarterback, I'm going to move him up pretty quickly. The unfortunate thing is they're kind of battling for that playoff spot, so their pick might not be as high, which is unfortunate. Right. But you could see a Trey Lance drop maybe in the middle of the first, and if that does happen, regardless, it's going to be an upgrade from Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith. So I like McLaurin from what we've seen, even if he doesn't get the upgrade. But if he does, he's going to have a really awesome fantasy season next year.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, number 10, since we just talked about our number 11, is Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson here a little bit further down, that based on his talent, from a talent perspective, I think he's a top 5 in the NFL. But the situation here in Chicago, Trubisky's been playing better, but I'm still not a huge fan of this situation here. You do have some unknowns with him moving into this offseason. Does he re-sign in Chicago? Is that a possibility, or does he head out and want to play with a more proven quarterback? You look at the list of quarterbacks that Allen Robinson has played with over his career, and you say, I would want to play with a more proven quarterback too. So I think you could see him, head to, I don't even know what offense, man, but there are some proven situations out here that he could absolutely walk into and sign with, and that would be an immediate upgrade for him. So he's at 10 right now. It's a little bit of a downgrade just based on his talent level, but if he does sign with a more pass-happy offense, an offense that is willing to just feed him targets, I think we could easily see him move up into the top 5, maybe even the top 3. He's still fairly young, so I think that he is someone that you can absolutely look at moving up dynasty boards this offseason. Wide range of outcomes with him, though, depending on where he lands. Where do you have Allen Robinson?
So I have him a little further down at wide receiver 17 right now. It's likely a little too low. He's one of my favorite receivers to watch. Just a solid route runner, really good route runner. Just a great number 1 wide receiver for any quarterback. And part of the reason why he's further down, because there's so many great receivers that I kind of pushed ahead of him, but also the uncertainty with free agency. I think his situation right now is great, but I'm not sure where he's going to be if he does chase, on a contending team. I wonder if he might become a wide receiver, the second option in an offense. Sure. And if that were the case, I still think he'll be really productive, but it won't be the same as him being a wide receiver 1, which I absolutely think he's capable of, and he deserves to be in a situation where I think he can win, and there's just some uncertainty baked in with that, and where he's going to be next year. But I love him as a receiver. He's one of my favorite guys to watch. So he slots in a wide receiver 17, but it could easily be higher depending on what happens next year.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to your number 10 wide receiver. Who do we got?
So I have Justin Jefferson at 10. Pretty historic season for what he's doing right now as a rookie. He's not just proving he's the most productive rookie receiver this year, but he's also one of the better and more productive wide receivers in general. He's wide receiver 5 in yards per route run, wide receiver 12 in dominator rating. He's just a complete, fantasy receiver who you can rely on week to week. And I think it's just going to be upside from here on out. So I'm high on Justin Jefferson, maybe higher than most, but I definitely think he's going to have he's going to just be a wide receiver one for going forward. And this is even with Thielen there. And if Thielen moves on or something, he's not with the Vikings anymore. I think Justin Jefferson with added targets could be even better.
Oh, completely agree. And I've got him at 7, Marvin.
Oh,
so
there you go.
You definitely need to move him up. I think that's what we're taking away from this conversation. No, I completely agree. Jefferson, from what we have seen this season, I was a big fan of his coming out. I had him as my number 3 ranked wide receiver in this incoming class, had him ranked above CeeDee Lamb, and I just loved his talent. And so for him to step into a situation here in Minnesota and produce the way that he has this season, as a Bears fan, I'm sitting here like terrified that we have to see, and I'm sure you said you're a Packers fan too, like we have to see Justin Jefferson 2 times a year for the next decade, right? Because he's just going to be unstoppable as he continues to continue to grow. We're ranking him at 7 right now, and he's a rookie, right? Yep. Like he still has just so much more room to grow and get even better. So yeah, I think that Justin Jefferson, I'm glad that you brought him up because I've got him at 7. Completely agree. I'm going to go with my number 9 and 8 wide receiver here. I always do this with, I say like, all right, let's take our time and talk through these, and then we spend way too much time talking through them and we can barely get through our list. So I'm going to go 9 and 8. It's Calvin Ridley and Chris Godwin. So Calvin Ridley, even though he is the 1B in this offense, even if Julio Jones is out, we've seen it, right, where Julio has missed and Calvin Ridley has just continued to produce. He's broken out in a huge way this year. I was a big fan of his coming out, or a big fan of him coming into this year. Tags and I were talking about him nonstop as the Chris Godwin of this year, and it rang true. Calvin Ridley, a top 10 dynasty wide receiver for me. Moving forward, what happens if Julio Jones retires after this year? With all of his injuries, that has to at least be in the conversation. And if that's the case, then Calvin Ridley could continue to just grow and shoot up dynasty rankings. Chris Godwin, great in this offense regardless. What happens if, you brought it up, what happens if he does end up leaving in free agency and goes to be the number 1 wide receiver on a team? And I think that he has the talent to do that. I think that he could easily step into an offense and command 140-plus targets. And if that's the case, then, man, we got to be talking about him as a dynasty wide receiver that can absolutely improve their stock. And, I mean, regardless, even in Tampa Bay, I still think that he's a fantastic receiver and brings that top 12 value. So I think that he's someone who he's not going to creep outside my top 12, but yet has the potential to grow even more or shoot up my rankings even more based on this offseason. Where do you have Calvin Ridley and Chris Godwin?
So I have them just one spot above yours. I have Chris Godwin at 7 and Calvin Ridley at number 8. And I completely agree. I think Calvin Ridley has proven that he can be the wide receiver 1 for Matt Ryan. If Julio does retire or something happens, he's not with the Falcons, then I definitely think Calvin Ridley can hold it down and be that top 5 wide receiver for fantasy. So I definitely think there's that range of outcome and upside to him. And Chris Godwin, you already talked about it. I think he's a little, he's had a little bit of a down year in some cases. I think it's just I had his upside so much higher than what we've seen so far. And part of that is because Antonio Brown, he was signed in week 9 and his target share dropped and it's just not the performance we would have hoped, but he's still a really good fantasy receiver. I think there's that upside if AB's not there next year, or if Chris Godwin signs with a high powered offense, and he could be the one. I think there's that range of outcome there, and the upside would be massive. So I like both of those guys going forward as easily top 10 receivers, if not top 5.
Absolutely. So you said you have those guys at 8 and 7. Did we miss someone at 9?
We already talked about CeeDee Lamb. Got him at 9.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So then let's go 7 and 6 for you then, correct?
Yes.
Or
5 and 6.
5 and 6. Let's
go. So at 6, I have Michael Thomas, who took a significant drop for me. I had him as a wide receiver, as the Dynasty wide receiver 1 heading to the season after, breaking the reception record last year, single season reception record. And it's, part of it is because almost I would label as a lost season with the injury, and then coming in with Drew Brees not being there, and then Taysom Hill coming in, and he was still receiving the volume of a wide receiver 1. I mean, wide receiver 2 and weighted opportunity rating. I mean, he's getting the deep targets, he was getting the target share. It just didn't materialize into fantasy production because he didn't score any touchdowns. And so there is that uncertainty with who's going to be the quarterback next year. What is it going to look like? So that's why he's dropped to me. I still think he has that upside to be a wide receiver 1 and could potentially be a value for anyone wanting to trade for him in the offseason, because I've tried trading Michael Thomas for Justin Jefferson straight up in some leagues, and the Justin Jefferson manager said no. Straight up.
Right.
And
right.
To me, that's so surprising. Earlier in this year, you'd be like, I want Justin Jefferson and a couple picks for that. And it's just, that's how far Michael Thomas has fallen. So he's at 6 for me. A.J. Brown, to me, is my favorite receiver to watch, really. After a hyper-efficient rookie season, just showing that he can do it with volume as well. His target share's up. Efficiency's down. It's regressed as expected. But he's still number 1 with Ryan Tannehill. And what I like about that is that there's continuity with that offense. You have Ryan Tannehill long-term. The offensive line signed, most of it signed long-term. And then Derrick Henry is there as well. So you have that nucleus of that offense set for years to come. And we know what to expect from A.J. Brown. And I think he's a top 5 receiver in Dynasty going forward. Where do you have those guys?
Yeah, great minds think alike. I have Michael Thomas at 6. I have A.J. Brown at 5. So I completely agree with the points you made. Michael Thomas, yes, it's been a down season. The injury certainly doesn't help, and his value is at an all-time low. But yet, from my perspective, we need to make sure that we catch it, right? Mm-hmm. We can't let it fall too far as these dynasty analysts. So, yeah, I want to say, it's definitely not at number 1 like it was earlier this year. But yet, I don't want it to fall outside the top 10. I think that Michael Thomas is still a proven commodity, and he's absolutely someone that can be a reliable fantasy asset moving forward next season and beyond. And then A.J. Brown, you talked about it. The ceiling is the roof. Like, this guy just has the talent to be a top 5 dynasty wide receiver for a very long time. For me, at number 4 and 3, it's DK Metcalf and then Tyreek Hill. We are getting into the range where it's like, I don't care, right? Like, flip a coin as to the ranking of these guys. They're all proven commodities and guys that I want on my dynasty rosters. DK Metcalf has kind of fallen off here, at least a little bit here recently, but yet we cannot forget what he's been doing this season. Absolutely insane, and still very, very young. Someone who is just going to continue to grow. And so DK Metcalf at number 4 for me. Tyreek Hill, I really don't need to explain this one. This guy is just unstoppable, unguardable, whatever word that you want to use to describe Tyreek Hill. You've got to use it, because Tyreek Hill is just one of the best receivers in the NFL, and he's tied to Patrick Mahomes for long term, like long term. So Tyreek Hill, I want him on my dynasty roster. Who do you have at 4 and 3?
I have DK Metcalf at 3 and Hopkins at 4. You already talked about DK Metcalf. I think tied to Russell Wilson. The upside is massive. We've seen what he could do earlier in the year with that really solid and productive stretch of games there for 10 games or something, being the clear-cut wide receiver 1. And DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is just slightly down for me, just because he is an older receiver, 28, I believe now, but still not that old. But you have to wonder with some of these younger guys there, would you take them ahead of Hopkins? And for me, he just slots at 4. Still tied to Kyler Murray in a great offense, high-powered offense with lots of targets available for him. So I do like him long-term. And like you said, you can flip a coin and pick any of these top 4 receivers, and you're going to be just fine.
Yep, for sure. I've got Hopkins at 2, so I completely agree here with your reasoning that, you look at the target share that he has in this offense. Kyler Murray long-term, I think that even though he is a little bit older, I'm still fine. Like, I play Dynasty, I don't know about you, I play Dynasty in a 2 to 3 year window, mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, right? And if that's the case, Hopkins has still got 2 to 3 really, really good years left in him. So Hopkins at 2 for me, and then Devontae Adams at number 1. Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. I talk about Tyreek Hill is unstoppable. Yeah, Devontae Adams unstoppable. So really don't need to analyze that one too much. If you have Devontae Adams on your fantasy football roster, you know why he's at number 1 with the way he's produced this year. Who are your number 2 and number 1? So
I have Tyreek Hill, number 2. We already talked about him. Love him a lot with Pat Mahomes for the near future. Just explosive and has the wide receiver the wide receiver one upside year in, year out. And then Devontae Adams, who I have as the wide receiver one. Not much to say. I mean, he's just on a historic pace. One of the best wide receiver fantasy seasons in NFL history right now. I think he's fourth best behind like Wes Chandler in 2 seasons from Jerry Rice. I mean, it's just that good. And so, I love him long term. I don't think they're going to move on from Rodgers anytime soon, considering how he's playing right now. I know they drafted Jordan Love, but I can't imagine they move on from Rodgers. And if that's the case, look at that 2 to 3 year window that you mentioned. And I think Adams is still the wide receiver one for Dynasty in those upcoming 2 to 3 years.
Yep, completely agree. All right, let's do this really quick, and then we'll talk about the incoming rookie class because I want to make sure that we get you out of here in a respectable amount of time. This has gone way longer than I thought, but it's been such a good conversation. Let's just run through each of our 15 to 1, if you want to just go from 15 down to 1 and go through your Dynasty rankings, just to recap.
Yeah, so I have Stephon Diggs at 15, Amari Cooper at 14, T. Higgins at 13, DJ Moore at 12, Terry McLaurin at 11, Justin Jefferson at 10, CeeDee Lamb at 9, Calvin Ridley at 8, Chris Godwin at 7, Michael Thomas at 6, A.J. Brown at 5, DeAndre Hopkins at 4, DK Metcalf at 3, Tyreek Hill at 2, and then Devontae Adams is the wide receiver 1.
Awesome. For me, I have CeeDee Lamb at 15, Keenan Allen at 14, Stephon Diggs at 13, Amari Cooper 12, Terry McLaurin 11, Allen Robinson 10, Calvin Ridley 9, Chris Godwin 8, Justin Jefferson at 7, Michael Thomas 6, A.J. Brown 5, DK Metcalf 4, and then Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, and Devontae Adams round out that top 3. Really quickly, let's look at this incoming rookie class and just say, can we see year 1 any of these incoming guys threaten that top 15 already? We're talking about Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Both of those guys ended up in our top 15. If Jerry Jeudy had like a pretty good quarterback, I think he'd be in this conversation too. But yet, do we see any of these rookie wide receivers pushing and threatening that top 15 in their rookie season? Some of the guys that I'll just throw out and get your opinion on, and I'll just do this in kind of a lightning round fashion for you. Jamar Chase is kind of at the top of the board. There's someone who's kind of pushing for that top of the board, but Jamar Chase out of LSU opted out this entire season, was part of that championship run for LSU last year. Phenomenal wide receiver. Do we see him threatening that top 15? Obviously, it's hard to say without knowing the landing spot, but based on his talent, do we see him threatening that top 15 in 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had to pick one who I feel really, really good about heading into the season being top 15 potentially by the end of it, it would be Jamar Chase. Just from what we've seen from him, he just has that alpha receiver build and that attitude. And I think he's just a complete receiver, great route runner, great after the catch, elite ball tracking, physicality. I mean, everything that you'd want from a wide receiver one, you have in Jamar Chase. And, we're raving about Justin Jefferson being a great receiver. Well, he was the number 2 behind Jamar Chase. That's how good Jamar Chase is. And I think he has that top 10 upside in Dynasty, depending on the landing spot.
I completely agree. I think that he has that ability to push the top 15. Devontae Smith is the other one that I'll talk about here. I think you have these other guys below of Jalen Waddle, Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman. I think that those are great. They're great receivers in their own right. I don't think that without knowing the landing spot, I don't think they're going to threaten top 15, at least in my opinion. You let me know if you have other thoughts. But the other guy that I will talk about here is Devontae Smith, and I'll get your opinions on him because ridiculous season, what he's doing here at Alabama. One of the most talented receivers that Alabama has seen. And that's, coming from Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, like Henry Ruggs coming out last year. This is a very, very talented school as far as wide receivers, and Devontae Smith is up in that conversation. So, Smith, do you think that he has the ability to push the top 15 in his rookie season?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think he's the most polished, or one of the most polished receivers in this class. Everyone's knocking on his size, but I think he plays so much bigger than the frame that he has. I mean, he's solid in contested catches. I mean, he seeks contact. He's not shying away from it. And the fact that he's leading the country with 1,500 plus receiving yards is just amazing on, 38% market share, target receiving yard share. It's just what he's doing is historic to me, and I think he has the opportunity, depending on where he lands, with his efficient route running, quick feet, and all of that, to just be an immediate contributor for an NFL offense. So I think he's probably the safest, one of the safer receivers in my opinion, that you can plug him in, and I think he'll produce immediately. So I like him a lot, and definitely think he's right up there with Jamar Chase.
Absolutely. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Marvin, it was good to finally chat with you on a podcast. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come on and talk some Dynasty wide receivers. Remind everyone where they can find you and your work.
Hey, I really appreciate this opportunity. It was really, really fun to just chat with you about Dynasty. And, everyone can find me on Twitter at @FF_MarvinE. Most of my work and things that I find, tidbits I find, get posted on there. And I come out with a weekly article that Kyle already mentioned. It's his previous article, the Dynasty Report for the Fantasy Footballers, that coming towards the end here. So I just have one more coming out, I think, one or two. But then hopefully the off-season content can be found on the Fantasy Footballers as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. We'll be back tomorrow with a huge show where we're going to be taking a look through every single Week 16 matchup and making sure you guys are ready and prepared for your fantasy football championship. For Marvin Elequin, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. While you're here, make sure to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel so you can get free content that will help you make the best possible lineup decisions and get an edge on your opponents.